It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind of stillness you don't often get on a ranch. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a soft glow across the land. I'd been looking forward to this day for months, finally moving into my late brother's property, the place I inherited after he passed away. But as I was walking out of my house, carrying a box of old family photos, my peace was shattered by the sound of a woman screaming like I just robbed a bank. "Thief! Thief!" she screamed, her voice high-pitched with panic. "Call the cops. He's stealing." I stopped dead in my tracks. For a moment, I just stared at her. She was standing there, this blonde woman, frantic, eyes wide, pointing at me like I was the criminal she was certain I was. Then I looked around me, beat-up truck, the sign that said Carter Ranch, in front of the house, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. She thought I was stealing my own stuff. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, moving into the place that had been in my family for generations, and this woman was convoying and said I was a thief. A thief? Really? Her name was Karen. Well, Susan, technically, but around here, she was known as the HOA president, the kind of person who thought she owned the place, even though she didn't. She had a clipboard in her hand, like she was some kind of authority figure, and she was charging at me as though she was about to catch me red-handed. "I've seen you here for the past few days," she shouted, pointing at me. "You've been taking things that don't belong to you. You're stealing from this community. Now, I'm not exactly a saint, but stealing my own stuff, that's a new low, even for me." I set the box down on the tailgate of my truck, trying to keep my temper in check. I've been an engineer for over 30 years. You learn quickly in this line of work that, when things go sideways, you don't let emotions control you. You handle it logically. I pulled out the small black notebook I've carried with me since my days at Boeing. Old habits die hard. You write everything down. "Ma'am," I said calmly, my voice steady, "you just called the cops on a homeowner moving his own things." Her face turned a deep shade of red, but she didn't back down. "How do I know those papers are real?" she snapped, her hands trembling as she clutched her clipboard like it was her lifeline. At this point, I could feel my blood starting to boil. But I wasn't going to let this woman get the best of me. Not today. I stood there as she continued to scream into her phone, calling the police on me, and I wrote down everything she said, the time, the phone number, even the names I could read on nearby mailboxes. The neighbors were starting to gather on their porches, watching, some even filming the scene. Sure enough, the sheriff showed up exactly 11 minutes later. Sheriff Frank Hayes was a solid guy, mid-40s, patient, but you could tell he'd been dealing with Susan's nonsense for a long time. When he saw Susan, he sighed deeply. "Susan, what is it this time?" "Call number 74, he muttered under his breath. I extended my hand to him. "Sheriff Hayes, I'm William Carter. I inherited this ranch from my brother Tom a few months ago. I've just started moving his things." I showed him the legal papers, the deed, the probate documents, all neat and organized in a folder. Sheriff Hayes looked at the papers, nodded, and then turned to Susan. He had that look on his face, the one that only comes from years of dealing with people like her. "Susan, this man owns the property legally. End of story." But Susan wasn't finished. She crossed her arms and planted her feet like she was making some kind of stand. "How do we know those papers are real? I've lived here for 3 years, and I've never seen this man before." The sheriff rubbed his forehead, probably trying to keep himself from blowing a gasket. "Because I checked the county records, Susan. Like I do every time you call." Which, by the way, has been 74 times in the past 2 years. The neighbors were starting to shuffle back into their homes, clearly uncomfortable with the scene. I kept my composure, but inside, I was shaking my head at how absurd this had gotten. As I stood there, still taking notes in my little black notebook, something caught my eye. Susan's grass was way over the limit, about 4 inches tall, which broke the HOA rules. Her car was parked half a foot over her property line, and her mailbox? Chipped paint, not up to code. You know what they say about people who live in glass houses. I turned to Sheriff Hayes and said, "Hey, I appreciate you coming out. Just wanted to let you know, I'll be leaving here full-time starting next week. And I plan on being a good neighbor and following all the community rules." I could see Susan tense up. She didn't like that one bit. The sheriff tipped his hat and left, but not before giving Susan one last warning. "Susan, no more false reports. I've got real crimes to solve." Susan wasn't done. No, not by a long shot. Just 18 hours later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. It was an HOA violation notice. Apparently, my grass was too high, and they wanted me to pay a due loss 75 fine within 5 business days. I couldn't believe it. I measured my gross. It was barely 2 inches tall. I walked outside with my measuring tape, just to be sure. It was the kind of thing you do when you've spent your whole career dealing with precision. The next few days, more violation notices arrived, each one more ridiculous than the last. First, it was my truck. Then it was because I'd fixed a loose board on my porch. Susan was trying to wear me down, thinking I'd give up and leave. But I wasn't going anywhere, and I wasn't going to play her game. I started filing my own violation notices against her. My truck was parked exactly where it should be, right in the middle of my driveway. But Susan's car? Parked all the way over the property line. I wasn't about to let her get away with this. I documented everything, took photos, and filed my own complaints. It felt good, like finally having a little power of my own. And then I found out something that changed everything. Susan wasn't just a petty HOA president. She'd been harassing families for years, forcing them to sell their homes at ridiculously low prices, and then get fished by the properties for a fraction of their worth and sell them later for a huge profit. That's when I realized what was really going on. Susan wasn't just after Mesh, was after the whole damn neighborhood. She wanted to drive people out so she could buy up their property. I went to the county records office, dug through public documents, and soon enough, I had all the evidence I needed. I was going to take her down. But Susan wasn't going to make it easy. She called an emergency HOA meeting, trying to paint me as the villain. She even had charts, claiming that my presence in the neighborhood was driving down property values. But I was ready. At the meeting, I stood up, walked to the front, and calmly laid out the evidence. 3 families just like mine had been driven out by Susan's campaign. And every time, she bought their properties for a fraction of what they were worth. The room went dead silent. Susan tried to shout me down, but it was over. The truth was out. Before anyone could react, Sheriff Hayes walked in, flanked by 2 deputies. "Susan Mitchell," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and filing false police reports." Susan's meltdown was something to behold. She tried to tear up the evidence, but it was too late. The neighbors were already on my side. As she was escorted out in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. Susan had been using her power to manipulate the entire community, but now she was getting exactly what she deserved. In the aftermath, the neighborhood started to heal. People who'd been avoiding me were now apologizing. The HOA was restructured, and I was elected president, with new bylaws in place to make sure something like this could never happen again. But the most satisfying part? Watching as Susan's scheme unraveled. Her fraudulent active white ties were exposed, and the community was better for it. Now, when I look at the neighborhood, I see a place where people actually care about each other again. It wasn't just about standing up to a bully, it was about restoring trust in the community. And as for Susan, well, she's not going to be running any more neighborhoods for a long time. She thought she could manipulate the system, but in the end, she underestimated a guy with time, patience, and a lot of very good notes. What do you think? Is it ever okay to take matters into your own hands when the system fails? Or should we always rely on authority to sort things out? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think.